please give a warm welcome to the hosts of Alternate Ending.
Hey, Jacob. Robin Carey here from Alternate Ending. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
We're doing great. You probably have not a whole lot going on. There's like nothing going on today, like perfect day to just sit down and just let the mind
Nothing
rest.
on your mind, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I had plenty of sleep last night. Totally ready for this.
Same. I didn't stay up till 2:00 thinking that something might happen unnecessarily either. So
Yeah, I had prematurely thought that like election night would be the night that that would destroy me, but it's the day after. It's always the next day. It's the day after, happily ever after or whatever it is. That's where the real rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I mean it's all pretty scary, and even if it all works out in the end, I don't know. I mean, 67 million people have voted for Donald Trump, so I'm kind of like just
That's been my sentiment
in a weird place.
That's my sentiment entirely. Carrie and I have been talking about this, all morning, as I'm sure many have. Is like that's the part that gets me. Is like I guess I didn't understand. I guess I live in a bigger bubble than I realized. Like I just thought we were more aligned as individuals than on certain things, and it's just it's crazy to try to comprehend that. But we are not here to talk about politics.
Speaking of scary,
we're here to talk about an escape from all of those types of things. And your movie, Come Play, which released on last Friday, was it the 30th? Right in time for Halloween.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect type of film to get some escape. Congratulations on the formal release, the theatrical release, which these days, is far and few between. So, really excited for you to be able to showcase that on the big screen.
Thank you. Yeah, us too. I mean, it's obviously a strange time to have a movie coming out, but I'm glad that they were able to get it out to so many theaters and so many people were able to see it safely and enjoy it. It really, all things considered, it was a really, really good result.
And so what was your experience? Where did you go to catch it? Who did you see it with for the first time?
The first time I drove down to Orange County, which is the closest sort of nicest theater around me. I went with my mom and my wife to see it the first time. It was a sold out theater for COVID, capacity sold out. So it was great to hear those screams and sniffles at the end. And then I went back and I rented out a theater to bring sort of all my other closest friends and family to go see it.
That's fantastic.
Oh, good
that's
for
awesome.
you. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we've ventured out into theaters as well too. And I'm not trying to push that on anybody, everybody's own, comfort level notwithstanding. But I felt very safe in a theater, far more than I do trying to venture out to go get groceries from my local Costco or grocery store. So I don't know if you felt comfortable being in your setting.
Yeah, I did. I mean, look, everyone's going to feel a different level of comfort. I think, when I pictured theaters for the last several months, it was always like the opening night crowd jam-packed with people eating their popcorn and on their cell phones and stuff. And it was like, I don't want to be around that many people. But like, once you realize you're in there, like how limited capacity it really is, even for sold out, it felt pretty safe to me. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, so I can't make any claims, but we all felt comfortable together and we were able to, escape COVID for a second and enjoy the movie.
Yeah, it does provide like a little bit of just,
little normalcy, little taste,
in this crazy time that we live in. So, I want to talk a little bit about the film too. Is the Come Play follows a character named Oliver, a young boy, who's on the spectrum and is distant, is socially distant, as it were, just distant as a character, and engages mostly through the use of his smartphone. And then, lo and behold, a monster of sorts may or may not manifest itself in the device, and then the plot kind of takes off from there. And it's just a really interesting premise, and the conceit is fantastic. And I understand this originated from an idea of yours as a short. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, first of all, for saying that. And yeah, I made a short film first. It was in 2017, so about 3 years ago now. Made a short with my friends, much simpler. It's just a guy in a parking lot attendant booth. And it sort of introduces the idea of the Lar-Ry creature, and kind of what he can do. And ultimately I was just trying to make something that felt full of suspense and atmospheric in a very short amount of time. And luckily I got the opportunity to expand it into a feature. And of course, at that point it was, the short is really, had so little character wise to go off of. And so it was really kind of starting from scratch and figuring out who would be the most interesting family at the center of this story, that would sort of be the most affected by a creature trying to access you through your technology. I sort of came up with this idea of Oliver and his family, because my wife actually works with kids on the spectrum. So I've had sort of a window into that world for many years. And I've really grown this admiration and love for the families and the kids. And it was just a character I hadn't seen on screen much. And especially the star of a movie where it's not, about him having autism. It's just one of the many facets of who he is. But it was a great jumping off point for a character who needed his devices to communicate with the world, and then, sort of turning that on its head throughout.
And beautifully represented and acted by, I'm going to mess up Oliver, the character's, the actor's name. Is it Azhy?
Yeah, it's close. Azhy, like with an E almost.
Okay. I messed up.
Even though it's spelled with an A.
I messed up Gillian's name earlier on a she's in everything these days, by the way, like fantastic performance from Gillian, but I really got to give it up to Azhy then in this case as well too. Just really just connected with him right out of the gate. And so how did the casting, because casting for a child's role is very difficult oftentimes. How did the casting process work?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, and especially in this role. I mean, he's in 99% of the movie, so we knew we needed someone special. And when I turned in the first draft of the script, it was actually Steven Spielberg who was the first one to bring up Azhy to me. He shared with me a audition tape that Azhy had done for another movie that ended up not getting made, but it was this amazing audition between Azhy and Oscar Isaac. And, I was like, wow, this kid's amazing. How do I say no to Steven Spielberg? And also on top of that, I still saw like hundreds of kids, but it honestly just kept coming back to Azhy because he was just so in touch with his emotions. He was so imaginative. He had so much empathy for people who were not exactly like him, which was so important for this role. And ultimately it really became, there was just no contest. There's a lot of amazing young actors in the world, but he was just so perfect for this role. And then he did a ton of work with me after, we shadowed kids on the spectrum. We talked to speech therapists, and there's even this young man, Sam, who was a young man on the spectrum who actually used to be nonverbal like Oliver when he was Oliver's age. He was someone that I had involved in the process, both from like the script stage to give me notes on it, and then even talking to different actors involved. So so it was a process, and I'm just so impressed with what Azhy was able to do at his age, and he really sort of disappeared into the character, and he was amazing.
That's the perfect way to describe it. So Rob and I both have 2 little kids, so right out of the gate when we're watching this, it's an empathy trip for us as well, because there are these kinds of things where you have the parental experience, so you're watching Gillian's experience as she goes through this and what her experience is like sort of navigating this with her son. And I think maybe a little bit of added context for those that are listening too is that she has her own things that she's going through, so she's sort of struggling with some of her other relationships in her life, which are adding to the complexity of the things that are going on with Azhy too. So that said, going into this, I'm really feeling for Gillian. I'm like, oh my gosh, like how is she navigating this? But yet she fell into the role so well together with him that, for us as a viewer, I mean, we're just like glued to the screen, just like watching how this is all going to unfold for her. And I guess, I don't know, we just love sort of the strength of character that she brought to it in parallel with him and the strength of his own character. And I think you represented that in a way that we really connected with.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think movies that are scary are only scary when you care about the characters. And for me, it's the thing that I just get the most excited about as well as a writer and a filmmaker is just interesting characters that are going through things that are challenging them. And so yeah, I mean that was the fun of it. And Gillian was amazing as well. Her and John both did such a wonderful job playing these complicated parents and going through very unique situations, both before and after Larry starts haunting them. So yeah, I mean, I'm very, very glad I got to work with them, and just as a whole, everyone sort of really became a family.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think so. Tell me if I'm right, like off or on. This is just my one person view perspective. So it's frightening. It's a frightening movie. There were plenty of jump scares. There were plenty of times where I was like hiding under the sheets and I was totally freaked out because I was like, is something coming? Something's coming. It did that so well. But am I supposed to also think of this as like an ET story a little bit too? Like I kind of like Larry, I think. I don't know. Is that weird? Am I not supposed to like Larry? Like, what's the perspective?
I don't think that's weird. I mean, look, everyone's going to get something different out of it. I can say that as a filmmaker, I liked Larry. I mean, I think, my favorite, I guess, villains are people you can sort of relate to in some way. I thought a lot about like Frankenstein's monster, and sort of how scary he was, and how he would hurt people, but at the same time, he didn't mean to. He was sort of just didn't know his own strength. He was new to this world, right? And so I did find compassion and connection with Larry and his desire to stop his loneliness. I think every character in this movie is lonely in their own way, including Larry. And that's something I certainly can relate to. I mean, not just during these COVID times, but I mean, I grew up without a ton of friends, and I remember being super envious of like my friends who or my classmates who had tons of friends, and so, yeah, I don't think it's strange to empathize with Larry. I mean, I wanted to make a film that did bring some amount of empathy into the world for everybody. I mean, even like the bully characters and stuff are not exactly what you assume at the beginning. So Absolutely. That was important to me.
Yeah, and what I really enjoyed as well too is I'm a big rule when it comes to horror films. It's all about rules. Like what are Larry's rules? Did you have to like really think about those as well too on what how he can when he can interact with certain things? Did you have a little playbook for yourself on, no, this wouldn't make sense because of Larry's origins or however it plays out?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think rules are important when writing. I mean, at some point you tend to have to break them to make things a little scarier, but I tried not to. And I tried to really stick, once I sort of came up with this idea, which was different from the short film, but once I came up with this idea that like you could only see Larry through your devices, I think that really opened me up to like the kinds of things that he could do that could be really scary, and also lent itself to the idea that I didn't want to see Larry too much early on. I wanted to sort of save him till later, Jaws style. And the way to do that was to like, he could still be in our presence and we could still like get glimpses of him. But we didn't have access to see him all the time. And I think once I came up with that, sticking to that rule was really helpful in crafting some, hopefully scary scenes.
That was the newspaper scene.
Oh yes, in the parking lot is fantastic.
That was like the best.
And in this Instagram culture and every device culture that we live in, the whole device aspect, the way that you came up, I was kicking myself. As a film school dropout, as I often call myself, is like that's $1 million idea right there. So I love
think of it.
I love
think
that
of it
concept.
Though, Rob.
How did we have a lot of cinephiles, some people who work in the industry as listeners as well too, and up in people who are looking to make their first feature or working in different aspects of the industry. I'd love to know a little bit more about, because you have a fantastic filmography of just so many shorts. You're an editor as well too, editing your own work as well too. So how did this get from short to feature? What was that transition like?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, obviously, I'm very grateful that I got to do this, and I'm super lucky. I mean, I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world that got to make a movie at Amblin, the place that I grew up loving movies from and made me want to make movies. At the same time, I think it is important to make sure people realize that this is, 15 years of like nonstop trying to get to this point and like having things constantly fall apart and almost get there multiple times. And so I mean, the sort of short version is, by the time this got made, I mean, I had already been a working writer for many years. So there was, I think, a level of trust, at least in my writing ability. And, the leap for them was the directing side. But, I had worked with enough studios at that point that it was not as far-fetched as just like, yanking me off of YouTube or something and handing me a movie. But, I was an editor for many years, making a living doing that, which was super important to, I think, becoming a better writer and a filmmaker. I think every filmmaker should edit at some point. I mean, as a kid, I was an actor, which is sort of, I think that was helpful, especially being a child actor, like remembering how I liked being talked to as an actor at that age and sort of working with Azhy in a fun way like that. And then, as I was editing and I was trying to write on the side and then slowly started selling stuff, initially to some of the producers that I had edited movies for. And then eventually I was able to transition into just writing. And then that's been the last, 4 or 5 years. And now, hopefully I get to direct more. I mean, that's been the ultimate goal since I was 8 years old. So it's,
well, that's what I was going to ask,
because
you've dabbled in so many different aspects of it. Do you have I look at, my work, there are certainly things that feel more like work and less that like I'm more or less passionate about. It doesn't mean I don't like those things, but so if for you as an auteur, having dabbled in all aspects of it, it's directing that, ultimately for right now that's kind of the main drive.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of been the drive forever, and everything I've been doing has been sort of trying to get to that point, which is obviously very difficult to get there, and you also have to make a living. And I genuinely, I mean, I like editing and I like writing, but it all sort of, to me, always feels like in service of someone else's vision, which is great. Like, that's fun when you work with a director you love and like you have a great back and forth. And but ultimately I still just, I like being the guy who's got the vision and gets to like say something on screen. I mean, there's, of course, all the faults lie with you at that point, but all the right. Things that go right lie with you as well.
Yeah, that's true. So you say 8. You're 8 when you are like deciding that this is like the path that you want to go down. So I imagine you probably were into films as an 8-year-old too, and that's when some of like the best scary horror films of my generation, which maybe were in the same category, I don't know, came out. But what were some of the ones that maybe influenced you as a kid into some of your work? What were some of those early films that you saw when they were still like really magical and you didn't know how they made things fly?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's like the movies that inspired me, to want to make movies. Part of that was being on set and seeing how movies were made, to be honest. But certainly like the horror films that stuck with me. Like, I remember I saw the 1950s version of The Fly when I was super young, way too young to have seen that. I was going to say, probably too young. And, it's the black and white movie, but just utterly terrifying when I saw that as a kid with the mask of the fly and the arm and everything, like, just stuck with me and really terrified me. And I didn't necessarily seek out horror films for a long time. I mean, I think things like Jaws were probably like the deepest I would go. Poltergeist I loved, which was obviously very scary and still one of my favorite horror films. But then it was really like, I remember it was more actually haunted attractions that really got me into the horror stuff. I would go to haunted houses as much as I could. The very first time I was, screaming with terror, but then I wanted to keep going back. Then I eventually started making my own haunted houses, first in high school. And then as an adult, again, we had a pretty successful haunted house that ran for many years in LA. And that was, I mean, honestly, that was the thing that like taught me how to do suspense and, how much fun it was to sort of scare people, but also make people care about characters. And you know, the short film Larry that I made, the costume of Larry is actually from one of the haunted houses that I had made in my garage.
I
So
wondered that. I'm like, what? So Larry, we should talk about Larry is. I don't even know how to talk about Larry. He is absolutely frightening. The way that he moves is also frightening. And there's this element of him. He's nothing that anybody is going to have ever seen before. So you're saying this is like a set piece that you had used in the past, or how did you?
yeah, I mean, in the short film initially, it was, you know, I had this big sort of stilts costume that I had made that involved these like long fake legs and limbs and a sort of part costume, part puppet. And I had that still from the haunts, which we hadn't done for a couple years. But when I was making the short film and I wanted to make put a monster in it, I was like, hey, I've got this, you know, monster in my garage. Like, let's put him back on and use him. Which is what Larry was in the short film. And then in the feature, I worked with the Jim Henson Creature Shop to sort of take that general silhouette and idea of the character and create something totally new. You know, it was important to me that it was done practically, especially in a movie that was so much about technology. I didn't want it to feel like the monster was just more technology. I wanted it to feel tangible. And have actors be able to act off something. And so they developed this amazing puppet that would take like 4 puppeteers to operate and, you know, walk around the house. And he became just another actor that we could sort of block scenes with. And it was really incredible. And I'm so happy we did it that way because it just made for some really fantastic visuals.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that a big learning curve though, going from the short to a feature? I mean, you're starting with, you know, your haunted house costume that you had, and now you're working with the Jim Henson four-man puppeteer group. You know, it's a big.
It's a
do you
leap.
ever
It's a
feel
leap,
like
yeah.
imposter syndrome a little bit? You know, when you're on set and you're like, what am I? Like, I'm in charge
How
of
did I
this
get here?
film.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like, of course I get that feeling all the time. I will say that like the first day, you know, obviously we went through months of pre-pro and like, you know, I was hiring all these amazing people like DP, production designer, composer, all these people that had worked, you know, so much more than me on some of my favorite films. And, you know, I got to set the first day, there's all these trailers and trucks and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, having a little panic. What am I doing? But honestly, like once I got sort of on set and it was just me and the DP, the camera, the actors, like you sort of forget about the giant apparatus behind you. And it's kind of after the first couple seconds, it felt like, oh, this is exactly the same as anything I've ever done. And that's true. I mean, of course there's more money behind you and you know, you have more toys, but ultimately like you're just trying to make something that feels honest, and trying to use your instincts the best you can. So that feeling, for the most part quickly faded away. And I was able to just try to make the best movie I could.
Yeah, and you did it with your short. Carrie and I actually watched the short.
I know you made it sound like we didn't earlier, but we watched
No,
it.
and honestly, it holds up. It's very good.
I was like, oh, great. Now I'm scared
fantastic,
again. In 5 minutes, I'm very scared.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was fun. I mean, I've made a lot of shorts over the years, and it was, you know, that one. It's funny to me, the ones that like land and whatever, but like I'm glad that one, you know, connected with people and I got to make this.
Yeah, the other thing that I noticed in the short that you carried over into the film that I think adds to the tension and adds to the sort of atmosphere of the movie is the sound. So you hear Larry's a little bony, I'll say, for those who haven't seen Larry just yet, and you hear every creak, you hear every movement, and it's very in your eardrum. And those elements, I think, for us, I don't know, just added to the creep factor. Was that more of your influence, or did you have a sound team that was sort of working for you to help develop the scary elements in sound to pair along with your film?
Yeah, well, of course, I had an amazing sound team led by Joe Zubin at Formosa. I will say, like, sort of the direction I would give a lot, both in the creation of the visual of the character and the sound, was more about the feeling of the character and wanting to make him feel as pained as possible when he was walking, sort of adding to his loneliness and sadness. I wanted to feel arthritic, and also feel heavy, like he was just sort of like it took work to move. you know, and they took that idea, and we had a ton of different versions, and we would pick and choose like individual bone crunches and stuff. And also like the way he moaned and like his sort of labored breathing was a mix of different people. You know, some of it is Joe, the sound designer. Some of it's Azhy, who I brought in because I was like, you don't have much dialogue in the movie. Let's have you talk for Larry for a while. And then like me a little bit. So it was just sort of like, you know, us all working together to create this, you know, unique sound of Larry that was so important because we, you know, it's obviously important when we see him, but it's also very important for the first half of the movie, like before we really see him very much, to like feel his presence in the room with you.
Well, you nailed it. Yeah, it's funny. You're thinking, arthritic, lonely. What could that? Walnuts in your sound? It's walnuts. Arthritic and lonely. Get some walnuts. We'll crack them open. It'll be perfect. But it's actually pretty interesting that you used Azhy for some of the voice work for Larry as well too, because I think there's certainly many reads on the film that you could probably take. You know, there's a manifestation angle, and I think that's really neat that that there's some connectivity, but then between Larry and Azhy as well too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I never. It's, you know, because I see Larry as a character and less of a monster. I you know, I certainly never wanted to draw any parallels between Oliver and Larry in the wrong way. But in terms of them both being lonely characters who need companionship, I did think there was something interesting about using some of Oliver's voice in the character of Larry as well.
That's super interesting. It's something you wouldn't know if you were just watching it like we did, but it's going to be interesting for those who might, you know, hear this first and then go see it second, or vice versa as well. So I love that you infuse that. I think that that message is something that I think, you know, everybody can use right now and everybody can empathize with right now in so many different ways. So I think bringing that through in your film, which would be an unexpected thing that you would see in a horror movie, but something that I think is needed and welcome today, especially. So we just really enjoyed it. We're really eager to get out there and talk about it and push it to listeners and to friends and get them out there to go enjoy it as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I hope, you know, more people are able to seek out the film and find sort of the heart and compassion in it that I was trying to infuse, and find something that's yes, suspenseful and scary, but on top of it all, you know, sort of is imbued with empathy and love.
I think they will.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jacob. Appreciate the time.
Yes. Good luck.
Of course. Thank you guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
all the kind words.
Of course. Take care.
Take care.